The US government spends like a drunk trader, but it works. The US government is over $34 trillion in debt. It spends more than it earns year after year, like a hedge fund on margin with no stop loss. And somehow it works. Markets don't collapse, the dollar doesn't die. In fact, America is still seen as the safest economy on earth. So the real question isn't why is the government spending so much? It's why hasn't it broken everything? This is the weird, counterintuitive story of the deficit. Why it exists, what it funds, and whether it's genius or madness. What even is the deficit? Here's the basic math. In 2024, the government collected about $4.92 trillion in taxes, but it spent $6.75 trillion. So that shows a gap of nearly $1.83 trillion. That is the federal budget's deficit. It's like earning $49,000 a year and spending $66,000, then just borrowing the rest. But the US borrows at a global scale, issuing bonds, paying interest, and rolling it over. This isn't rare. The US has run deficits in 45 of the last 50 years. The real debate is, what are we spending the borrowed money on? Not all deficits are dumb. Some deficits build nations, others just buy yachts and missiles. On one side, you've got spending on bridges, schools, science, energy, things with long term payoff. On the other side, overbuilt defense budgets, tax loopholes, corporate subsidies. We shouldn't be asking, is the deficit bad? We should start asking, is the deficit smart? Because not all debt is created equal. Some creates value, some just keeps the rich rich. What are we getting trillions for? Let's look at return on investment. Education with a 12% return on investment. Infrastructure following with 4%. Healthcare, which varies, but in the long term, it's around 5%. Military spending around 1%. Tax cuts for the billionaire, 0%. Childhood programs are 13%. Clean energy is 1%. Prisons and incarcerations is 0% return, similar to tax cuts for billionaires, with education at 12%, which we've already stated. So when people say government should balance the budget, ask this instead. Would you rather have a balanced budget or a smarter one? Because if we borrow to invest in the future, that's not irresponsible, that's strategy. Here's where it gets scary. Here's the problem. The more debt we rack up, the more we spend just servicing it. In 2024, we'll pay over $1 trillion just in interest, more than we spend on defense. That means less money for schools, research, or climate, and more going to bondholders and banks. And if interest rates stay high, that interest burden explodes. This is where deficit becomes dangerous. Not when we borrow, but when we can't afford the bill. While interest payments only sit at a 13% rate, that is still very significant in comparison to the total 100% of spending that our government does each year. What happens if trust breaks? What keeps the US system alive is one thing: trust. Trust that treasury bonds will always be repaid, trust that the dollar holds value, trust that the US will manage its debt eventually. But if investors lose that trust, yields spike, the dollar weakens, borrowing costs soar. That's when a deficit becomes a real crisis, not because we ran one, but because people stopped believing we could manage it. So, is the deficit a disaster? Here's the truth. Running a deficit isn't automatically bad. Sometimes it's how we invest in our country's future, like a startup burning cash to grow. But if we misuse it, if we waste it, politicize it, or ignore rising costs, it becomes toxic. So no, the deficit isn't a disaster, but it's also not a free lunch. We need to stop asking, how much are we spending, and start asking, what are we getting in return? Want more finance information without the fear-mongering effects Wall Street leaves? If you're tired of the screaming headlines, fear-mongering charts, and want to understand how money, power, and economics works, subscribe to Thought Kernel. We'll be continuing to break more economic topics and educational subsidiaries down for you. In the future, we hope to see you again. Thank you.